right. No, no. All right. Well, we are going to get started here. Man, it's so good to see everybody. We haven't done this in a long time. I would see if we remember how to do it. Um, so, as Adam said, if you have the Church Center app and you don't want to write your notes, on the front page there, on the home page, there's a little button that says Wednesday Study Notes. And you click on that, and it pulls them right up. Now, these are my notes that I have on my paper, slightly condensed, including all of my typos and misspellings and all that good stuff. So I have noticed one on, it looks like the second or third line, there's already a misspelled word. So normally I'm the only one reading these, and then I give them, I give them away usually afterwards. So now you all get to experience all of my misspellings and typos. And sometimes I write things that make sense to me, but I don't know if they'll make sense to other people. So, that'll be a fun thing to track as we do this as well. So, man, I'm really, really excited. We're going to be starting tonight the book of Exodus. And so just to give you a little bit of background, for the past several years, every Sunday school class I've taught, every lesson I've written, from the teenagers to the young adults to senior adults, I've been suggesting that we study Exodus for a very long time, and no one has taken me up on it. And you guys got the closest. Last year we voted on what we wanted to study, and Joshua and Judges was number 1, but Exodus was number 2. And so I took that as my sign that after we finished Joshua and Judges, we could do Exodus. And look, Joshua and particularly Judges is the weirdest, is funniest books of the Bible. That all the craziest stories are in there, all the stuff about Samson, and all that good stuff. Exodus is pretty great too, though. So I'm really excited. So we're going to start in Exodus chapter 1. So Exodus is the second book of the Bible. It's pretty easy to find if you start at the beginning and just go flipping through. You won't, in no time, you'll be in Exodus, right? So here's what I want us to do before we get too carried away here. This little exercise that I like to always encourage people to do. When you're reading a story out of the Bible, especially a story that you're very familiar with, it can be really easy to just kind of go like, oh, I know this. I've heard this before. I've seen movie versions of this. There's a VeggieTales of this, right? There is a VeggieTales of Exodus. It's called Mo and the Big Exit, and it's a Western. So, yeah. And when they turn the river to blood, when the Nile turns to blood, he strikes the river, and it turns to tomato juice, and Bob faints, right? Yeah. Fantastic vegetable-based humor. And I only know that because when I worked at a Lifeway Christian store in college, and we had VeggieTales playing on a loop 24/7, just all day, every day in the store. And some of you were like, oh, yeah, that's great. And some of you are going, what is VeggieTales? VeggieTales is a cartoon where they tell Bible stories acted out by vegetables. Larry the cucumber, Junior asparagus, Bob the tomato. Yeah. And they stop halfway through and have silly songs with Larry. It's great. Good times, right? So some of you are too old to know what VeggieTales are, and some of you are too young to know what VeggieTales are. And some of us are right in that sweet spot, that window where we know about VeggieTales. It was basically like, trying to think of the equivalent. What was like an older, like kids? What was the weird little blue puppet? Gober or something like that? Gerber? Not Grover, not from Sesame Street. There's some weird puppet movie that they used to make us watch in Sunday school when I was a kid. Was I the only one? Okay. Oh yeah, the felt board was, yeah. We had felt boards still, yeah. Yeah, the flannel board with the little stick-on people. Yeah, that's good times. So it's especially easy when you're reading a story that you're really familiar with to kind of just skim over it. Like, oh, I know this story. And you sort of miss some of those little details. So here's what I like to do. Pretend like this is a completely new story. Act as if you've never heard it before, right? Like if you picked up the Bible and you just decided, I'm going to read the Bible, and you've never heard any Bible stories, you didn't grow up going to Sunday school, none of that, and you just picked it up and read it, what would stand out? What would you notice? What things would be kind of like jumping off the page at you? Actually, a really good way to do it is read it the same way you would read like a novel. So like if you read a novel, how many of you are fiction readers? Anybody? Right? How many of you haven't read a book in like 10 years? right? Yeah. Yeah. Some people love to read, some people not so much. But when you read a novel, or if you watch a movie, right, if they keep repeating something over and over, you're like, that's weird that they keep saying that. That's probably important. It drives me crazy when my wife and I watch a movie together. I'll be like, this is a great movie. I can't believe you've never seen this movie. When we first got married, she hadn't seen any movies, like at all. So I had to show her all the greats, right? We had to watch Star Wars. We had to watch Lord of the Rings. We had to watch Tombstone. We had to watch Gladiator, right? Well, yeah, no, I'm talking about like great movies, right? Like when I married a woman who had never seen the movie Tombstone, right? One of the greatest movies ever made, right? And so we had to sit down and watch movies, and it would drive me crazy because we would sit down and watch the movie would be about to start, and as you know, any good movie, the first 5 to 10 minutes of the movie are very important. You have to learn who the characters are. You have to know what's going on. And I would look over, and she would be doing something on her phone. I'd be like, you're missing key plot points, okay? You really kind of have to see this part to understand all the rest of it, you know? And we need to approach Bible stories the same way, right? This is a story that was written, it's a true story, but it was written down by people who knew what they were doing. They knew how to tell a good story, right? And so there's things in here that we're going to notice. So, one last thing before we jump in. The word Exodus actually comes from the Greek name for this book, which is made up of 2 Greek words. Ex means out, and hodos means road. So it literally means the road out, right? What's the road out? The road out of what? Egypt. Yeah, exactly, right? In Hebrew, most books of the Bible, their Hebrew name is just the first word or words of the book. So the book of Genesis, you know what it's called in Hebrew? In the beginning. Because those are the first words. So the book of Exodus in Hebrew is called, These Are the Sons. Because what's the first words of Exodus 1:1? These are the names of the sons, right? So they didn't get real creative on the naming whenever they were coming up with their names, right? Now, most of you will remember we talked a little bit about the Hawaiian Pidgin translation. Did we talk? We talked about this, right? For the uninitiated in the room, there is this weird Pidgin dialect of English spoken in Hawaiian Islands, and someone has translated the Old and New Testament into Hawaiian Pidgin. And the names of the books are fantastic. So, 1st and 2nd Corinthians is number 1 for the Corinth people, number 2 for the Corinth people. And people is spelled with an O at the end, people, right? And then the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, is called Jesus Guys. And Revelation, the revelation of Jesus to John, is called What Jesus Showed John. Right? And so I need to look up what Exodus is. But they have the best names of their books. Let's see. I'm going to pull it up real quick. Let's see what Exodus is called in Hawaiian Pidgin. Bear with me for just 1 minute. The Hawaiian Pidgin version is in your YouVersion Bible app if you want to look it up. However, it's under languages, not under translation. So it is technically a different language. So here you go. Are you ready? All right. Genesis is called Start. Exodus is called Outa, O-U-T-A, Outa, out of Egypt. Leviticus, which is about the Levitical priest, is called Priestess. And then Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers is called Census, and Deuteronomy is called Rules a Second Time. So we would go through all the rules for a second time, right? Judges is called Local Leaders, and Leaders has an A, Leaders, right? So, good times. So let's do this thing. If you have any questions, you're allowed to talk. This isn't Sunday morning, right? If you have a question, pop your hand up. Miss Robbie right here has a microphone. She'll come over to you so that we can all hear you. Some people don't like to talk to the microphone. You don't have to if you don't want to, but we would like to hear your question, right, or your comment. So if you have any questions, pop a hand up or just say it out. This is pretty laid back night. So let's do this. Exodus 1:1. It says, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. And Joseph was already in Egypt. And then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful, and they increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now remember back to your Sunday school. Remember the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors? His brothers were jealous of him, so they decided they were going to kill him, and then they had this great idea. Why just kill him when we can sell him as a slave and make a little money? And then we'll just tell everybody that he died, right? So they sell him as a slave, and where does he get taken to? Egypt, right? He lives out the rest of his life in Egypt, and there's a famine. His brothers and his dad and all their family actually moved to Egypt. And at first it was 70 people, right? Now that 70 people stayed in Egypt. And over the next couple hundred years, they multiplied and grew so much that it was a problem for the king of Egypt. He was nervous about there being too many of them. We're going to read more about that in a sec. These 12 sons of Jacob, Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and his 12 sons were the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. And there's some cool names in there, Benjamin, Joseph, Levi, Reuben, Judah, names we've heard. And then there's like Naphtali and Issachar and Zebulun. And then my favorite one is just Dan. Just Dan. So many of you remember Donald Holliday. He was our children's pastor here before Adam. All of Donald's boys are named after the 12 sons of Jacob, right? So he's got Asher, Levi, Benjamin, and then their most recent one, his name's Daniel, so Dan, right? And so I said, well, are you going to go for all 12? I mean, eventually, you could do Judah for the next one, but eventually someone's going to have to be like Naphtali, and someone's going to have to be Issachar, and there's no good nickname for that, I asked them one day, they had all these boys, and I said, you have like 5 kids, you're going to go for one more? He goes, I feel like at this point, what's 1 or 2 more, You guys just had number 5. You know what Brother Charles told me one time? He had 5. And I said, what was it like having 5 kids, man? And he said, well, when you have 1, you can kind of double team them. And then when you have 2, it's man on man. And then when you have 3, you're running a zone defense. So when you have 4, you're kind of like the coach, just keeping the bench organized. He goes, and by the time you have 5, you're just in the bleachers watching. And then his father-in-law, Brother Paul, many of you know Brother Paul, he told me that he had 4 children, and they were all boys except 3. That's a head scratcher. And that he and his wife were going to have a 5th kid, but he had read somewhere once that every 5th baby born in the world was Chinese. That's a Brother Paul Eaton joke. And all of you who know Brother Paul, you know that he's got 3 or 4 jokes locked and loaded for every situation. So this is the background, okay? Joseph from the coat of many colors, he came to Egypt. His 12 brothers brought 70 people with him. And the story of Exodus picks up about 300-ish years after Joseph. We don't know exactly how long, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. And what do? Well, they fulfill the command that they were given in Eden. Be fruitful and multiply. And boy, did they multiply. Let's read verse 8, what this new Pharaoh thinks of this. It says, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. And they built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. And they made their lives bitter with hard service, and mortar and brick, and all kinds of work in the field. And all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. So this new Pharaoh isn't like the Pharaoh that Joseph worked for. The Pharaoh that Joseph worked for understood that Joseph and his people had a really awesome God, and he wanted to bless them. This new Pharaoh doesn't feel that way. He does not know the Lord, so he puts the people under slavery. Look at verse 15. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, the other who was named Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stool. If it's a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and let the male children live?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwife comes to them." He's like, they're having babies quicker than we can get there. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then the Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." This is an example of these midwives, these Hebrew midwives are an example of someone being blessed for lying, which is an interesting thing to notice. You know, obviously we're not supposed to lie. God doesn't want us to lie. We want to be honest. But there are certain situations and certain areas where there's a greater good, right? There's sort of a gray area here. Not only is God okay with them lying, it says he actually blesses them. A little bit of a background. Shaphrah means fair or bright. That's what that name means. And Puah means sparkle. Right? These names are never used anywhere else in Scripture. This is the one and only time they ever come up. Right? So Puah, it's a great name, maybe for a baby girl. Right? Zoe, not too late to change. Right? Maybe a middle name. Right? Puah. Right? What do you think of that? Puah Colson, Tyler. That could work. Yeah, he's into it. All right, good. He agrees. So why does Pharaoh only want to kill the baby boys? Yeah, it's true. If you don't have boys, you don't have any dads when they grow up, right? This is a whole generation of Hebrew men. Now, the same thing happens if you kill all the baby girls. You don't have any moms. So why the boys? Well, because they also don't grow up to be warriors. They can't grow up and fight against you. So this is pretty diabolical stuff. I mean, this is like some targeted, like, thought out killing. It's not good. So his first plan doesn't work. So what's plan B? Well, he says, every son that's born to the Hebrews shall be cast into the Nile. So plan B is the river. And ironically, the river is going to send an Israelite baby boy into the Pharaoh's house. The thing that he set up, the rule that he put in place to eliminate all the Hebrew young men who would grow up to challenge him one day, is the thing that God uses to send the man that will eventually overthrow the Pharaoh into the Pharaoh's house. So imagine you've never heard this story before, and you just read chapter 1. This is not looking so hot, right? This story's off to a bad start for our people, for our characters, our main characters. It's not looking good. So what should you expect to happen next? This is like, trying to think of an example in a movie where it's like, it starts off and things aren't so hot. It's been a hard time. And then a hero emerges, right? This is the Moses origin story. If this was a superhero movie, this is the story of how Moses got bit by the radioactive spider, okay? That's what's going on here. This is just the ancient version of that, right? So look at chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife as a Levite woman. And the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. And she put the child in it, and she placed it among the reeds by the riverbank." Now here's the most fascinating thing about this part of the story. The word for basket is actually the Hebrew word ark. And it's only used one other time in all the Bible. Do you know what it is? Noah's Ark. This is the same word for Noah's Ark. It doesn't say that she put him in a basket in Hebrew. She says she put him in an ark made out of weaved reeds and rushes. The word for basket there is literally the Hebrew word ark. It's only ever used to describe this and Noah's Ark, and that is on purpose. They expect that you've already read the first part of the book. If you're this far in, you've already read up to this point, right? So when you see the word ark pop up again, what should you be thinking of? Yeah, and what happened on Noah's Ark? Yeah, what happened to everybody outside of the ark? Okay, little baby Moses gets put in an ark. What happens to all the baby boys outside of the ark? They die. But Moses, because he was inside the ark, was saved. And not only that, what does Noah's ark and Moses' ark both travel on? Water. Remember when we read the biblical theme of passing through the waters, passing from death into life by passing through the waters? This is on purpose. God knows what he's doing, right? So Noah's ark, Noah and his family and the animals passed through the waters. They were saved from death through the water. If you are a good Bible student and you pick up the Bible for the first time, they want you to pick up on this. Your brain should be lighting up right now. You should be going, ding, 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 ding. I know what they're talking about right now. Moses is doing the same thing that Noah did. This is the exact same thing. Passing through the waters in order to be saved from death. And it won't be the last time that Moses passes through the waters to escape death. Can you think of the other example? Yeah, when God parts the sea and he passes through the waters, certain death is behind them when the chariots of the Pharaoh are chasing them and they pass through and are saved. This is on purpose. It's amazing, man. Sometimes people who are critical of the Bible say this thing where they say, like, the Bible is just fairy tales from the Stone Age that was written by a bunch of sheep herders. Every bit of that sentence is wrong. All of it. And I know I say this all the time, but it's because I'm a giant Bible nerd. This is maybe the most literarily sophisticated thing ever written. Even if you were a stone-cold atheist, you could spend the rest of your life studying this book just as a work of literature, just as a work of art. It is one of the most literarily complex, sophisticated, and dense things ever written in the history of mankind. And anything that even comes close to it was written after it, inspired by it. And I think it's important for us as believers to know that God's word is beautiful. And it is complex. And you can spend the rest of your life studying it and barely even scratch the surface. And that's what we're doing here. That's why we do this on Wednesday nights, because we want to love God with our mind. We want to understand just how deep the words of our Father go. And so when you read something like this, it's just a small example. And then what did Jesus teach us to do? As Christians, what are we called to do? We're called to pass through the waters from death to life too. That's what baptism is. That's why we baptize people. When you see someone get dunked in that water, you should be thinking of Noah and Moses and the Red Sea and when they crossed the Jordan and all the times in between. Because we're doing the same thing. We're going to pass you through the water and show that you've gone from death to life. It's amazing, man. I love it. So let's read about baby Moses. Verse 4. It says, "And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her young women walked beside the river. And she saw the basket among the reeds. And she sent her servant woman, and she took it. And when she opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him. And she said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.' Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?' And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' So the girl went and called his mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she brought him to the Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, because she said, 'I drew him out of the water.'" So, a couple things. Moses' name, in Hebrew, it's Moshe. It literally means drawn. Like if you took a bucket of water or took a bucket and scooped up water out of a well, that water would be Moshe. It would be drawn from the well, right? If you have ever heard anybody with the name Moshe or Moshi, that's just Moses. That's just how you say Moses in Hebrew, right? Also, another thing you may notice here, for my giant nerds in the room, does anybody know the story of Superman? How did Superman get from planet Krypton to Earth? They put him in a what? Otherwise known as a ark. Did you know that Superman was actually created by two Jewish teenagers who were comic book writers? And so Superman is based on Moses. True story. At least his origin story is. And so the idea that his planet was being destroyed and his parents wanted to save him, so they put him in this ark and they sent him away and he landed in a different place and was raised by a different family. All of that is based on the story of Moses, right? So next time you're watching a Superman movie, just know Superman is kind of like, he's like a Jewish superhero, first of all, right? And he is partially based on Moses. Now, the whole like being super strong and being able to fly, Moses doesn't do any of that. So I think that's the similarities basically stop here, right? But the next time you watch a Superman movie and you see that part, you'll know what we're talking about. So here's the question. Why did God send Moses to the Pharaoh's house or to Pharaoh's family? Yeah, if he lives in the Pharaoh's house, is he going to get killed? No, right? Also, he has a connection to the royal family that's going to come in very handy later. You ever wonder why when Moses shows back up from the desert, like 40 years later, he's able to just walk in and talk to the Pharaoh? It's because they all grew up together. Like, they all know each other. They're like, Moses, we thought you were dead, man. And he comes in and he throws the staff down and it turns into a snake. We're going to get to that, right? Now, here's the question. Does Moses know that he's adopted? Does he know that he's a Hebrew? Why? Yeah, so he actually did live at home for a little while he was little. Also, something gives it away. When she opens up the basket and sees a baby, she knows that it's a Hebrew baby. So I don't know if that's probably a pretty good bet, right? That he's probably circumcised. I don't think he was wearing the little hat, you know what I mean? I don't think those were around yet. Yes, that's the very next thing we're going to read, yeah. So, I mean, Moses kind of grows up in this weird situation where he's a part of the Pharaoh's family. He's sort of an adopted son. So he grew up, he knew the Pharaoh of Egypt personally. But he also is like kind of, he's an outsider. His people live in Egypt, but they're not from Egypt, and they're enslaved. And so it must have been very tense for Moses. Right? It was probably a very difficult thing. So let's read in chapter 2, verse 11, about how Moses murdered a guy. Right? This is the part we don't ever really talk about in Sunday school when you're with the little kids. Right? Moses the murderer. It says, one day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. And he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So, you got that picture in your head? He sees this going down, and he looks around to see if anybody's watching. He kills the guy and buries him in the sand. Right? Now, if you've never read this story before and you don't know who Moses is, we've just read about how his people are being oppressed, and you want this hero to rise up, and this baby was saved from the crocodile-infested river. And then what's the first thing he does? He goes and kills a guy. Like, oh, man. Now look what happens next. And when he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered Moses, who made you prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So apparently somebody saw something, right? And Moses was afraid. And he thought, surely the thing is known. And when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. So obviously Moses does know that he's a Hebrew. Despite being brought up in the family of Pharaoh, he knows. And Moses is one of the best people in the Bible But it's important to note that he is not perfect. A lot of times we read stories about these people, and we definitely talked about this when we talked about like Gideon and Samson, right? Kind of the whole point, a big part of the story is that these people a lot of times are not very good examples, and a lot of times that's part of the point, especially with Samson, right? Don't be like Samson. And unless you can catch 300 foxes and burn a town down, I mean, if you can do it, great, but maybe don't, right? I think that's maybe one of the most impressive things about Samson, the fact that he was able to catch 300 foxes. Like, that alone is pretty impressive. Moses is one of the best people in the Bible, but he's not perfect. He does murder a guy. But this shows us a habit of Moses's. Twice in this story, he feels the need to step in and intervene for the right thing, right? And we're about to read about another time when that happens. He's not afraid to step in, but he also maybe has a little bit of an anger problem, and he took it a little too far. Now, at this point in the story, Moses would have been about 40 years old, right? The only reason we know that is because when he goes to Midian, he's in Midian for about 40 years, and when he's 80, he sees the burning bush, right? So if you do the math and you subtract it, that puts him at around 40, right? So look at verse 16. Moses is hiding out in Midian. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. Moses is intervening again on behalf of someone being wrong, these women at the well, right? When they had come home to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hands of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock." So notice that when he's in Egypt, they call him a Hebrew. When he's out of Egypt, they consider him an Egyptian. Moses is kind of homeless, right? He doesn't really fit very well anywhere. Why do they think he's an Egyptian? Yeah, have you ever seen how Egyptians, we're going to have a whole night here in a couple weeks where we talk about Egypt and what life in Egypt was like. They were kind of weird, I mean, they were very different. They did their own thing, right? So you see this guy in Egyptian clothing. They would shave their heads. Shaved heads were, for men and women, were very big in Egypt, and then they would wear fake goatees. The men and the women. This is considered very fashionable in Egypt, right? That's why when you see the mummies, the sarcophagus of the mummy, they got that big thing sticking on their chin. That is a prosthetic goatee. That's an artificial goatee. It's a chin wig, is what it is. They strap it on. It had like a little ear strap, kind of like you would wear glasses, but for your fake goatee. Yeah, it's very important. I mean, we might be able to bring them back. I just feel like you can just grow a beard, like people have been growing beards. This is my problem with the movie. This has nothing to do with this, but the movie The Greatest Showman? They've got all the circus people, and there's this bearded lady, and she's like an outcast from society because she has a beard. And everyone else, you got the little short guy and the conjoined twins and stuff, and they can't do anything about that. But I just want to tell this lady, people have been making beards go away for thousands of years. Just go get a razor, and your problem is solved. I have a real problem with that movie. I could talk a lot about that movie. Maggie loves it, so we watch it every 3 weeks. So their dad asks, "How did this happen?" They say, this Egyptian man, he came, he saved us from the shepherds. Verse 20. And he said to his daughters, "Well, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. And she gave birth to a son. And he called his name Gershom. For he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." Gershom, his son's name, means foreigner, right? This was a thing in Hebrew world. They named their children highly specific names that had to do with the circumstances of their birth or something. There's actually a guy who, it says his mother spent many days in labor, and so she named him Jabez, which means brought forth in pain, right? Which, how do you live up to that name, right? So Moses settles down. He starts a family, starts a new life in the desert. If this were a movie, this would be the montage. You would see Moses, He's down, he's at his lowest point. And then he chases off these shepherds, and these women are happy to see him, and he goes to their house, and he meets their father, and he winds up falling in love. And you would see, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, you would see him meet Zipporah and how they would fall in love, and you would see their wedding, and then you would see their first child being born, and you would see Moses play. It would all happen very quickly, like whenever you see Rocky training to fight Apollo Creed, right? It would be like that. It would be the montage version. But if this were a movie, what scene would come next? What would we cut to next, right? Well, we would go back to Egypt. Remember on Bonanza when they would say, meanwhile, back at the ranch, right? Well, this is meanwhile back in Egypt. Moses has run away, he saved his life, and now he's started a new life, fresh start. He's never going back to Egypt again. But what's going on back in Egypt? Well, let's read that. Pharaoh knew what Moses did. The new Pharaoh would have been someone that, sorry, I read that wrong. The Pharaoh that Moses knew died, right, while he was gone. And the new Pharaoh would have been a male relative next in line. So this would have been someone that Moses probably grew up with, or at least knew growing up. So this was probably an uncle, possibly a cousin, or maybe even a brother. We don't know. In the cartoon version, the Prince of Egypt, they're like brothers. They're like the same age. But we have no idea, right? But what we do know is that while Moses is away, things are not going well for the Hebrews. Look at verse 23. It says, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. And their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. I love how it says that. In fact, the phrase, their cry rose up to God, this is the same phrase used in the Cain and Abel story. When God tells Cain, your brother's blood cries to me from the earth. It's the same phrase that God uses here. God knows when his people are hurting, and he cares about that. A lot of times people say this thing like, well, where was God when this happened? And the answer is, he was there, and he was watching. And I love how it says it here. God saw his people, and God knew. It doesn't say what. It doesn't say, and God knew, blah, blah, blah. God knew. It's a really beautiful way that it's phrased right there. God saw his people, and God knew. I love the way that that's written. That's right. So here's the big question. If God knew, this is the story so far. People of Israel, they've been enslaved in Egypt, and God raises up this baby boy, this chosen one. He's like Harry Potter being delivered by Hagrid, okay? Like this is the Luke Skywalker moment, okay? If you're watching a movie, this is the guy. This is Wyatt Earp rolling up into Tombstone, okay? This is the hero of the story. This baby boy in a basket. But then that doesn't work out. And he runs away, and he starts a new life, and he says, I'm never going back to Egypt. I'm living here for the rest of my life. He gets a job as a shepherd in the desert, which has got to be hard work. I've never been a shepherd. I've never worked in the desert. I don't think I would want to do both of those things at the same time, right? This is where we are. And then we get this flash that the people of Israel are so downtrodden, and they're crying out to God, like, God, please help us. And God hears them, and God says, I know what I'm going to do. So if this is a movie, what would be the very next scene? What would we cut to? God looks down on his people. He hears their cry. Here we go. Chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Fun fact, for some reason, Jethro's name changes from Reuel to Jethro at this point. It's never explained. He's never called anything but Jethro again for the rest of the Bible. I don't know if he had if that was like a nickname or what. I don't know. But he's Jethro from here on out. Okay, this is who every Jethro you've ever heard of has been named after. Okay, say what? Yeah, exactly, right? Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies, Jethro Tull, all of them. okay? Yeah. Maybe so. Yeah, maybe it's like a more personal name. I don't know. Right? But he's working for his father-in-law as a shepherd. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, here's what's important about that. This is the same mountain where Abraham was told to sacrifice his son. This will be the same mountain. Next week, we're going to read this. God's going to say, go get your people from Egypt and bring them back to this mountain. This is the mountain where the city of Jerusalem will be built. This is the mountain that Jesus is going to die on when he's crucified. This is the mountain that he's going to raise up again on the third day on. This is an important place. No, it's just a mountain. Yep, nothing really important, right? But it's going to be real important later. It says, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Imagine you were just walking around one day, and you happened to glance out in the woods, and you saw something on fire. I had a couple kids in my youth group one time who, they decided in the middle of the night that they were going to walk from they were spending the night at one guy's house, and they needed to go to the other guy's house. So they decided, they couldn't drive. They were like 15. So they decided to walk across Grangerland in the middle of the night. And about halfway there, they're walking down the railroad tracks over off of like Waukegan Road. And they're about halfway there, and they said that they saw something burning out in the woods. And there was a guy lighting a car on fire. They turned around and went home, never asked any questions. I'm sure it was something real shady going on. I'm sure it wasn't anything good, right? But imagine you're walking around and you see out in the woods something on fire, and you go, what is that? You're like, oh my gosh, is there a forest fire? Is there someone burning something over there? What's going on? It would stand out. And then you look and you see this tree on fire. But it's not burning down. It's not burning up. It's just full of fire. You would have to go take a closer look at that, right? I don't know if you feel this way, but every time I'm in the woods and I see anything, I want to go see how close I can get to it. If I see a wild animal, I want to see how close I can get to it before it runs away. Nothing bad has ever happened, right? One time, when I first came to work here, we went and walked around the little trail that goes around the pond, and Donald was showing me around, and I'm walking around, and I see these two raccoons kind of wrestling on the ground. And they weren't baby raccoons, but they weren't fully grown. They were like teenage raccoons, right? And they were kind of just wrestling, and we had walked pretty much right up on them, and they just never even noticed us. So I said, well, I'm going to go see how close I can get these raccoons and just see what happens, right? So I start walking over there. And one of them took off running like a normal person. The other one ran up a tree and just stopped and just froze and just looked at us. He was just eyeballing us. And I walked right over to him, and I'm not exaggerating. I was this close to the tree, and I was just like, this is crazy. I've never gotten this close to a wild raccoon before. Like, why is he not running away? This is weird, right? And so then I thought, I bet I could pick this thing up. And then I thought, if I have to go get a rabies shot, my wife is going to be mad at me. That was my first and second thought. So I just reached up, and I just grabbed him by the tail. And he never moved. He didn't flinch. He did nothing. And so I just grabbed him by the tail, and he just looked at me. He just never stopped looking at me. I was like, okay, I think we're done here. And I just walked away, and he just stood there staring at me the whole rest of the time. So anytime you see something weird like that, you got to go check it out. And Moses sees this thing, this bush up on the mountainside, and it's on fire, but it's not burning up. There's just fire in the thing, in the middle of it. That's something you got to go look at. So Moses says, I got to go check this thing out. Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Verse 4. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. And then God said, do not come near. Take off your sandals, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. if you had never read this story before, you've never heard the story of Moses and the burning bush, just so far in the story, we've taken a real roller coaster, right? And here's this guy. This is the moment in the movie where they come to the hero and they say, you got to come back, man. We need you. And he says, nah, I gave that life up a long time ago. I'm never going back there. I mean, like, think of every cop movie you've ever seen, right? Nah, I'm retired, you know? Or like every like heist movie where they go to get like they're putting a team together and like, we just need one more guy. And they go and get that guy and he's like, he's the best. He's the best safecracker or burglar or whatever it is. And we got to go get him. And he goes, nah, I gave that life up a long time ago. And they go, come on, man. And he goes, all right, just this one more job and then I'm out, right? If this is every movie. Like, you can think of so many times you've seen this, right? And Moses is the guy. We know that he's the hero. He doesn't know that yet. And so he thinks he's living out the rest of his life as a shepherd in the middle of nowhere. But God heard his people, and he has a plan. Because here's the deal. Moses is uniquely equipped to go do this job. In fact, you could make the argument that no one is a better fit for the job than Moses. He's like the most Egyptian and most Hebrew you could possibly be. He also has spent 40 years wandering around the desert that he's going to have to lead the people across. He's perfect. He's the man for the job. And so God hears his people, and God knows it's time to do something. So he shows up to Moses, and he says, Moses, I need you for something. So next week, we'll pick up, and we'll read there. We'll read what happens when Moses is calling, and how Moses really doesn't want to do it, but then he has to anyway, right? And man, I'm really excited. There's 40 chapters in Exodus, and they're just chock full of good stuff. And most of it you've heard of before, but I promise you, there's going to be some new stuff that you're going to be like, wait, what? And then we're going to get into probably a little bit of like Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. We got to read about Balaam, the evil wizard whose donkey started talking. Like, there's some good stuff in there that we've got to cover. We've got to talk about, okay? So, before we go, though, are there any questions about anything? I always try to, like, leave a little bit of time, but I don't always. So, Miss Robbie's got the mic. Martin's got a question right over there.
I'm coming. Welcome back.
Yeah, look, Robbie, look, you remembered how to walk the microphone around.
Is it working now?
It is.
I just wonder how old the Pharaoh was that did not know Joseph.
Well, so that took place over the course of a long time. So Joseph, the Pharaoh that was with him, died generations before. And then this new Pharaoh, he obviously didn't know Joseph because Joseph had lived so long before. So he wouldn't have even been old enough. I think it's saying more like he didn't remember like why Joseph and his people were important. You know what I mean? Like this new guy, he don't know Joseph, right? Yeah, well, we also know that in the 40 or so years that Moses was gone, that he passed away, so he would have at least been a little bit older.
Good. Because they had pharaohs that were 6 years old.
Yeah, some of the pharaohs started early. We're gonna do a lesson on just Egypt and what Egyptian society and culture was like, and the pharaoh was considered an actual god. Like they told the pharaoh, even sometimes the pharaohs would be little boys, and they told them, "You're the reason the sun came up this morning. You know that, right? That's how special you are, and like you're the reason that it rains every year and the crops grow. And if you get mad, it won't happen," right? So we got one more over here. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Egyptian culture. I'll give you a little sneak peek. One of the main ways that they practiced medicine in Egypt was by burning things and ingesting the smoke, but they didn't breathe it in. They actually stood naked over the fire and had it go. Then that's where the expression blowing smoke up your comes from. That's not a joke. It's 100% real. I'm not kidding. I know it sounds like a joke, but it's not a joke, right? Yeah, that's 100% for real. All right, Mr. Ricky.
In the beginning, when the king had all the babies killed, was it for a particular reason? Was he told that one of the Hebrew children would grow up and save them? And
Let me find it. It's I think it's in chapter 1. Let's see. It says, "A new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said, 'Behold, the people of Israel, there's too many of them. They're too mighty for us. So come, let us let us deal with them so that they don't multiply, because if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies and fight against us. So he was afraid that there was going to be so many of them that one day they would actually overthrow and like take over. So he was just worried that there was just too many of these guys.
Okay, I thought I'd learned all my life that it was because one of the Hebrew children would grow up. And
Now, I think what you're thinking of is actually in the New Testament. Whenever King Herod had all the baby boys killed because he didn't want he had heard the Messiah was being born.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they actually had to take baby Jesus to Egypt for the first few years of his life to be protected. So it's a very similar story. That's probably what you're thinking.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what it
Yeah.
is.
We got one over here. Yeah, in fact, those two stories are very similar, but in the one story, they're leaving Egypt, and then Jesus had to go live in Egypt for a little while to be safe. So yeah, it's kind of cool. Yes, ma'am.
I always wondered, when Pharaoh's daughter adopts him, is that kind of a normal practice, or does she just kind of show up one day, hey, I got a kid?
So adoption has always been around. People have been adopted all throughout the centuries.
Is that something that the royal family normally does?
I think it's probably like if the Pharaoh's daughter says, I want to do it, like who's going to tell her not to? You know what I mean? I think there's probably some of that. But actually, adoption was really common in the ancient world in royal families. So sometimes what would happen, like the Caesars of Rome, their own children wouldn't become the next Caesar. So they would have like a right-hand guy, and they would just adopt him. Sometimes he would only be like 5 or 10 years younger. And they would adopt him as a legal son, and so that he could be the next emperor.
Well, and there's nothing that says she was in a relationship or had any significant other, so she may have just wanted a child, and this was like, oh, the Lord sent me something, you know.
Yeah, who knows? I will say, it doesn't say anything one way or the other. It is kind of interesting that whenever Pharaoh finds out that Moses killed an Egyptian, he's like immediately like, go get this guy. So like maybe that he wasn't crazy about having a Hebrew baby brought into the family. I mean, who knows? But I mean, I'm obviously speculating there, but there definitely could have been some tension there. But it's kind of one of those, like, the princess decides she wants to do something, and you know, she's like, well, but I want this baby. He's like, we don't need a baby. Someone's gonna have to feed it. And she's like, I already got someone to feed him. You know, and so it could be that kind of situation. All right. Any other questions about anything? All right. Well, hey, man, I am so excited to be back doing this. Next week, we're going to talk about the burning bush, and then there's this one real weird part of the story that I guarantee you've probably never heard that we're going to get to. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to be back here this time next week and continue on through Exodus. So let's say a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you so much for your word, and that we can read it, and we can study it, and we can learn more about you and who you are. Lord, we want to love you with our minds. We want to know you better so that we can worship you better. We can know you more, Lord. And so, God, as we gather together on Wednesday nights, I pray that you would just speak in the power of your Holy Spirit through your scripture, and you would just illuminate it for us and teach us who you are. And it's in Jesus' name that we